open the Environment Committee meeting for the Metropolitan Council. I'm Gail Cederberg, Chair of the committee, and we have a quorum today, so that's lovely. I invite everybody to read the Dakota Land, Water, and People Acknowledgment. Every quarter, we'll be reading that out loud, and right now, we'll just ask everybody to acknowledge that. Everybody's had a chance to look at the agenda. If there's no other comments, I'll go ahead and approve the agenda. We've got the October 14th Environmental Committee minutes to approve. Do any comments or questions on those? If not, motion to approve.
Move approval.
Second.
That is approved, so we'll go ahead and approve those committee minutes.
We need to
Thank you.
vote, Madam Chair.
Excuse me?
We need to vote, Madam Chair.
Oh, yes, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. No? Approved unanimously. Thank you, Councilmember. At this time, we don't have any consent business, and so we'll move on to our non-consent business. We have one action today, and that's action item 2025-211, intergovernmental agreement with the City of Rosemont, contract 251084, and Chad Davison is here today. Welcome and thank you for coming.
Madam Chair, council members, thank you. My name is Chad Davison. I work in the Interceptor Engineering Group. And we were approached by the City of Rosemont, who is putting in a roundabout, which is a traffic circle, over the top of an existing structure that we own. That structure we need to get into 3 to 4 times a year to operate the gates. There's big stainless steel gates that divert sewer down one sewer or another. And we have to operate them 3 to 4 times a year to make sure they work when we need them to work. And then once the traffic circle's over the top, there'd be a need for a costly road detour every time we want to get in that structure. So we want to put in an access structure that gives us access from the boulevard and not have to go in the lane of traffic. In order to do this work, we want to do a construction agreement with the City of Rosemont. So they would construct the infrastructure for us and we would pay for it. This will save us restoration costs on the pavement and the logistics of managing a contract. The picture on this, on the left, is the existing structure. You can see the gates on the very bottom. It's not to scale, so it's kind of stretched, and then the traffic circle is shown on the right, and then our tunnel that we want to put in is the light green, and the existing structure that we need access to is the dark green. So the proposed action that the Metropolitan Council authorizes the regional administrator to execute an interagency agreement number 25I-084 for a cooperative construction project with the City of Rosemont for an amount not to exceed $700,000. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Do we have any questions? I have one question is how often does this get accessed, like in a year?
It gets accessed every 3 to 4 times a year.
Oh, okay.
So
Okay. Thank you. So the action before us is that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to execute an interagency agreement 25I-084 for a cooperative construction project with the City of Rosemont for an amount not to exceed $700,000. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Morales and Councilmember Lee. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? And that passes unanimously. Thank you. Next on our agenda, we have an information item from Kyle Colvin to present to us regional flow and cost allocation information.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee.
Just so there's not a test at the end.
Is that? Yeah,
Yeah, so
there won't be.
Okay.
For the record, my name is Kyle Colvin. I am the manager of the Wastewater Planning and Community Programs Group. Today's presentation is to just review the process, the methodology, and all of the moving pieces that go into determining the regional flow allocation. That would be the cost that gets billed to each community that is connected to and served through the regional wastewater system. Again, similar to the last presentation I made to the last Environment Committee, this was a presentation I put together that gives a pretty high level of detail in the process. Today's intent is to kind of provide a higher level. So there'll be some slides that I'll be going through pretty quickly. But of course, if you have any specific questions, I can certainly entertain those at the end of the presentation. I start these off with a list of terms and definitions. The municipal wastewater charge, or MWCs, we refer to it as those charges that get passed down to the communities connected to the system. They get billed monthly throughout the year. Also, there's a regional wastewater charge, or sometimes called the revenue budget. That's the overall budget that has been earmarked in our budget process that needs to be recovered through the MWC budget. So for 2026, that figure is $314.6 million. We commonly refer to that as the RWC. So the difference between the two is one's the community cost, and the regional level is the budget, if you will, that needs to get realized through the collection of the MWCs. As you know, there's 111 communities connected to the regional system. There's two primary components that go into determining a community's flow. One of those components is metered flow. That's flow coming from a community that gets metered through one of our dedicated wastewater meters. And then the other component, which takes more time, it's a smaller component of the overall volume, but takes a significant more time to determine, and that's estimated flow. And the reason for estimating those flows, I'll get into the reasons for that, and also what those flows cover in terms of where they originate from. The municipal wastewater charge is one of the three primary revenue sources for environmental services, the other two being SAC and industrial waste charges. As I indicated, the 2026 budget is based on revenue needs as outlined in this pie chart. You can see that the majority of revenues coming into ES comes from the municipal wastewater charges. This represents approximately 78%, or $314.6 million of our revenue needs through that mechanism. The total proposed 26 revenue source needs is $405.5 million. This pie chart here just summarizes what that $405.5 million revenue will be spent on. You can see that over a third of our total revenue income needs goes to paying debt service. And that debt service is realized through the acquiring PFA loans and GO bond loans that help finance our capital program. Also something, a fact that I actually just discovered a couple of months ago, somebody was actually using AI to do some research on the Clean Water Act, and I think our intern came in and actually presented this slide, but it was kind of an epiphany for me after working in the municipal wastewater charge for so long, discovering that there's actually a basis for how we do that in the 72 Clean Water Act. And basically that amended Clean Water Act requires that any jurisdiction that received federal funding, and the council did receive federal funding during the 70s and 80s when it was separating its sewers. So the council therefore is impacted by this requirement. But the Clean Water Act requires that those communities that receive funding adopt a cost recovery model for O&M based on a proportionate share basis, which is what the council uses. And later on in this presentation, I'll actually go through the evolution of that process that we use to determine the municipal wastewater charges. Also, I like to identify any statutes that apply to our activities. And for the municipal wastewater charge, there's two primary statutes, 3 subdivisions within those 2 statutes. 473-517 outlines the council's authority to charge local governments for their use of the regional system and can determine, and what's interesting, in that statute, it allows the council to determine the allocation method it uses to allocate those costs to the users of the system. Then statute 473-521 requires local communities to develop a cost recovery process to generate revenue to pay for the service that we charge them for using the regional wastewater service. And then also in 473-521, it authorizes the council to place any outstanding costs not paid by the community on the county tax rolls at a specified rate of 6% per annum that gets charged to any of those outstanding balances. And since 1991, since working here at the council, there's only been 2 outstanding balances that have been placed on the county tax rolls. And ironically, those occurred at the same year in 91, the latter part of 91. And it involved 2 Lake Minnetonka communities that basically just simply refused to pay their bill just on premise. It wasn't even technically based. It was so we've only had to do that twice. The council also has a number of policies and internal procedures that direct how the council bills for its service and how it responds to disputes over its charges. This slide here is a little bit outdated in that it references, in that third bullet from the top there, it references some of the policies that are in the council's Thrive 2040 policy plan. However, those policies that were in the 2040 plan were carried over into the 2050 plan. So the policy is still applicable even though we have are still in the current 2050 plan. The current policy states that the council will maintain wastewater charges that enables it to meet its regulatory requirements, maintain and rehabilitate its system, and make investments that reflect capacity to accommodate projected growth within the next 20-year planning period. The charges for use of this system will be on a cost for service basis and will be allocated to communities uniformly based on domestic strength and the volume that they're introducing into the system. If corrections to past bills are determined to be warranted, the council will limit the correction to a 6-year look-back period from the time the error is identified. And this process is outlined in Minnesota Statute 541.05. Customer communities must be given at least 3 months prior notice before to solicit feedback before the council can make any changes to its cost allocation process. And historically, we have changed that process 3 times since 72, and each time those changes have always gone through a task force for community customer input. Council policy also outlines a process to address a community's dispute related to its allocated cost and volume. The procedure outlines a progression of steps, the first being a period where the community and staff can discuss and negotiate around technical disagreements. This is usually centered around the data from our metering facilities, and a lot of times addresses the perception that the facility is not accurately or precisely measuring the data. So The majority of the disagreements that have, disputes that have come in have been settled through this first step. The second step, however, in the policy does outline a process where a third-party neutral mediator that's mutually agreed to by both parties will be employed to try and come to a settlement on the disputed cost allocation. And then the third step in that progression would be binding arbitration. Again, we've always settled all those disputes in the first step, so we've been very fortunate. The council has the ability to authorize a payment plan for any outstanding municipal wastewater charges if it determines that the lump sum payment that could be due from a community places an undue financial burden on that community. The payment plan is limited to 6 years and normally carries a reasonable provision of interest, and it's usually tied to whatever the current bond rates are. In the last 10 years, I'm only aware of one community where we have implemented a payment plan to recover the funds that that community hadn't been submitting. And technically, it was a staffing change, and it was an oversight at the local community level was the reason behind the lack of payment to the council for the bills. So it was simply an oversight, not really a refusal to pay. The council also has work instructions that outlines the roles and responsibilities of internal work groups in collecting, reviewing, data record retention, volume allocation determination, and community outreach. Work instructions also include the process of flow data adjustments to account for non-wastewater flow contributions or contributions that might not be related to a community-generated wastewater flow that should not be allocated to a community. And then I'll cover some of those adjustments a little later in the presentation. Again, basically, there's two volumetric data sets that go into the cost allocation process. I've already talked about those, the meter data through our metering system, and then the need to estimate flow. In a few cases, we need to estimate flow to adjust for volume determined through the metering. Sometimes a small area of a community doesn't get captured by a downstream billing meter that measures just flow from that area. So there's a process where we make these intercommunity flow adjustments, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. This is a slide that you've seen before. It summarizes the Met Council's wastewater metering system. We've got 206 permanent dedicated meters in our system that's tied to our telemetry system. These meters collect data 24/7 and retains that data, 50-minute data, basically in perpetuity. We have data going all the way back to 1992. We've got two primary types of meters in our system, but they can be broken down into two basic types. We've got gravity meters and pressurized flow meters, which this slide here will go into a little bit of detail. In the upper left hand of this photo is a photo of an underground vault that houses our Minneapolis meters, meter 131A and 131B. These are 36 meters and are our largest magnetic flow meters we have in the system. And the photo to the right of that shows meter 119A, which is one of our smallest mag meters located on a local lift station in the city of Medicine Lake. It's a 4-inch meter. And these mag meters represents those types of meters that are used on pressurized flow, so either on force mains or sometimes on our inverted siphons. We utilize mag meters as well. The photo at the bottom of this slide is a gravity flume. This photo is of a partial meter. It's the bottom left-hand side of the slide. It's our most common prevalent gravity meter in the system. but we also have a few Palmer bolus meters, and we have one U-flume meter in the city of Maplewood, meter 25. Each type of meter is specifically selected based on the hydraulic conditions at that site and represents the best type of metering technology for each hydraulic situation. As I indicated a little bit before, there are numerous small areas within the metropolitan area where one area in a community is served through an adjacent community's local collection system. The flow generated within these areas are too small to measure through traditional metering techniques, and therefore there's a need to estimate and allocate to the appropriate community. These intercommunity service areas are covered typically through an intercommunity service agreement that stipulates the terms of the service between the two affected communities. Approximately half of these intercommunity areas address the cost of regional treatment services, whereby the community receiving the flow will either bill the adjacent community for that flow, or in some cases will bill each individual property owner in the other community for that service. In these situations, the council doesn't become involved in any kind of adjustments because those adjustments are being accomplished through this intercommunity agreement and the cross-jurisdictional payments. However, in some situations, the agreement will either identify the council's role in estimating and adjusting these flow volumes, or in some cases, the agreement won't even address the cost of this intercommunity flow. And in those situations, the council has stepped in and offered to make those adjustments. So some agreements will name the council as serving that function, providing that service. And in other cases, usually the older agreements that date back to the 70s, it'll remain silent, and we've stepped in and offered that service to make those adjustments. There's different means in which we estimate that flow. In some cases, we use water use data, winter quarter water use data. We'll use SAC counts and assume some flow per residentially equivalent connection, or SAC, and annualize that flow. Sometimes we will install permanent flow monitoring equipment, measure for a short period of time, and then annualize that data over the year to come up with a total annual adjustment. And in some cases, we'll use a percentage of a downstream meter to estimate what the flow is from the smaller area upstream that's located in the other community. In every case, the methodology that we use to estimate these flows are mutually agreed to by each one of the impacted communities, so they're aware of how we're making these adjustments. And we do revisit that methodology from time to time so the communities can feel confident that the method that was agreed to years ago is still acceptable in the current process of adjusting those flow. And we currently have 114 areas within the metro area where we go through this adjustment process. So that's about half of the total intercommunity flow agreements that exist. Here's a map and a list. There's 34 communities whose flow is and whose MWC is entirely metered and don't require any adjustments from the council. There's 12 communities whose flow is too small to meter, and therefore our estimate represents the entire community's flow. And then there's 65 communities that have a combination of metered flow and estimations that comes up with their total annual allocation. In addition to adjust for community-generated flows within these intercommunity service agreements, the council also needs to adjust for other flow contributions into the system. These adjustments account for added flow to the system in which a specific community should not be charged for that flow. The sources of these flows can include construction-related dewatering discharges. All construction-related discharges that occur within a community require pre-approval from the council. The process for this approval is for the applicant to submit a special discharge request form to our Industrial Waste Pollution Prevention Group. The information related to the discharge is reviewed by various internal groups to comment on the quality of the discharge and the quantity of the discharge and the ability to accommodate it either through the treatment system or hydraulically through the interceptor system for conveying it. In cases where the discharge is related to a municipal or private construction activity, the council confirms that the costs for that discharge is being addressed locally. So again, that ensures us that there's no need for us to adjust for that, for the cost associated with that flow when we know that somebody is reimbursing the community that would be impacted by that flow. For MCS projects, for our projects, we sometimes require groundwater be discharged into the sanitary system because of groundwater contamination issues. In those cases, we require that the project document the volume of discharge so that adjustments can be made to subtract that volume out of a community who could be impacted by that discharge. So it simply gets subtracted out of their overall allocation volume. Septage and other waste, liquid waste from private haulers are subtracted from a community's flow allocation. These wastes are accepted at our waste receiving facilities located at our water resource recovery facilities and our facility that we have located up in Fridley. The introduction of flow at our Metro, Empire, and Fridley facilities are metered at our billing meters associated with St. Paul, Farmington, and Fridley respectively, and therefore we need to subtract those flows out so that those three communities are not impacted by the septage waste that gets hauled out. Sometimes, well, they get hauled in from across the region and in some cases even outside of the region. So those haulers get billed directly for that service, so we need to subtract that flow out from the local community's allocation. And also the third source that requires some adjustments is that the council's solid management strategy relies on hauling liquid sludge from some of our plants to the Metro plant. And again, this flow gets introduced into the system upstream of the St. Paul meters. So our operations group reports those volumes to community programs annually so that they can be subtracted out of the St. Paul allocation volumes. Here's an image of the special discharge request form that I talked about. I've kind of talked about the internal process and the reviews that we do to ensure that we can accommodate the flow both from a hydraulic standpoint, capacity standpoint, and a treatment standpoint. And here I'll be starting off with a series of slides that kind of outlines the process and who's all involved in submitting this information. The wastewater planning and community programs group, my group, is the one that's really responsible to pull all of these data sets together and determine what each community's volume allocation should be. And then one note, this organizational chart has changed at least once since I created the slide, so don't look at the organization chart too closely. First in this step, Environmental Services Finance establishes the required revenue needs for the regional wastewater charge and communicates that to the Community Programs Group. As I stated earlier, that revenue need is $314.6 million. And then data from our permanent billing meters is submitted to the Community Programs Group when the metering and alarm group, after its accuracy has been confirmed, there's a process that they go through to check the meters, to validate the data. Throughout the year, if they see trends that look suspicious, they will go out and have work orders to review that. That data, when it comes to us, is usually finalized by April or May of each year. Then where applicable, information is submitted to the Community Programs Group for communities that contain data that is used to estimate flow from those areas that are not captured through the council's metering system. So this is information related to that inter-community areas. This data usually is in the form of water use or lift station pumping data. And we receive this information throughout the calendar, usually on a quarterly basis, but we do receive it throughout the year. We get data from our industrial waste and pollution prevention group that includes volumes of hauled waste that I indicated a little earlier and other liquid waste. They also perform some temporary meter data collection that we use for allocating costs. And where applicable, construction-related discharges are also reported to us from our industrial waste group. This information is typically received shortly after the first of the year. We also receive data from our ES operations related to the annual hauled plant-to-plant sludge volumes, as I indicated. This is usually received in January or February of each year. And then again, where applicable, we receive volumetric data from our construction services group when it's related to environmental services construction projects, where again, we take that volume and subtract it out to any community that might be impacted from a flow allocation. This information is typically submitted to the Community Programs Group in January of each year. Then once all of that information has been received, a preliminary volume and cost allocation figure is calculated by community programs. A preliminary municipal wastewater charge notice gets sent to each one of the 111 communities that's connected and served by the regional system. The notice includes a summary of the data used to calculate the municipal wastewater charge and other information pertaining to the community and other information that impacts the calculation of that cost to the community. It also includes a comparison of the proposed flow and cost allocations with the previous 2 years' figures. And I'll show an example of that information sheet a little bit later on. This preliminary information sheet gets submitted to communities in early May, usually ahead of Environmental Services annual budget workshops, so that they have a chance to look what their upcoming costs could be, and we can address questions during the budget workshop. Then Community Programs forwards a preliminary municipal wastewater charge to ES Finance to begin the process of developing each community's upcoming charge letter. It summarizes, again, the regional wastewater budget amount, the regional total flow volume, the allocated communities flow volume, and the total annual and monthly MWC cost figures that community can expect to receive in the upcoming year. And I have an example of that letter a little later on, and these letters typically go out in November of each year. ES Finance then forwards a final cost allocation information to our regional administrators account receivable group to set up each community's invoice, and that usually occurs in November. Accounts receivable then sends out communities' first bill for January in the upcoming year in early December, the month preceding. Usually by December 7th, the first invoice goes out, and that invoice represents 1/12 of the total community's cost for that upcoming year. It's the total cost is divided by each month of the year. And then the community then remits payment to accounts receivable. So just to kind of give you an idea of what the process looks like, I included all of it on one slide. And I think the intent of this slide really shows that there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of data sets. It also shows that there's a lot of individual groups within the agency that really take part of this. Each little step in that process does include a quality control and data assurance process, review of the data. And it also shows that, we also have partnerships with those communities that are billing to get information as well. So it's not only an internal process, but it's also an external process as well. And then throughout the year, the Community Programs Group reviews data with our metering alarm group to ensure we look at trends. If we see anomalies, we'll point those out. We'll try and troubleshoot. First step usually is for our meter alarm group to send out a crew to our meter to make sure that it's measuring the flow accurately, that there isn't some debris downstream that might be artificially elevating the flow through the meter, which would indicate a higher flow. It's a process that's pretty well spelled out. But the point is that we routinely, no less frequently than quarterly, we meet with the metering alarm folks to go over the data and trends. And this is one example where something was depicted in the city of Andover. We noticed that in 1 month the flow had spiked. We went out and took a look at our facilities. Everything appeared to be fine. We contacted the city, and the city had notified us that they had a local construction project that included groundwater discharge, and they hadn't gone through the process of filling out the special discharge permit or request. But the good news is that peak flow didn't cause any capacity or spills or any backups into the system. So it does show that if someone doesn't submit the approval letter, we're going to catch them. So Big Brother's watching. Here we also, once we complete all the communities' municipal wastewater charge allocations, and before we mail out those allocations to the communities, we take a look and we rank from high increase of municipal wastewater cost from the previous year to the current year, from high to low. And in 2026 year, you can see that we had a number of communities whose increase represented a 12% or higher. And each year we call community programs, sometimes environmental services finance group will call those communities specifically and let them know what to expect when they do get that summary sheet from us. Most times these communities would have already been contacted because, again, we continuously review this data throughout the year and we can pick up on increases. So by the time that the year ends, in most cases, the communities aren't surprised by these increases. Here's a copy of what the municipal wastewater summary sheet looks like. It has the comparisons for the flow cost for the current upcoming year and the past previous 2 years. And then it also includes a map that shows our facilities along with our metering sites so that it can help enhance discussions on if we see a particular meter whose flow is increased. It also shows a summary of all of the estimated flow corrections that are made. Here's a copy of the municipal wastewater charge letter that finance mails out, again, usually in September of each year. It's a template letter. Every community gets the same letter, and it includes all of the cost allocations and flow and cost allocations for all 111 communities. This is the timeline that I basically went through. One important note on here, you'll notice that in December, the process is subject to a state audit. So every year, state auditors come in, they review the process, the data sets, the communications, the outreach, the allocations, to make sure that we're doing our part to ensure that all of this information is appropriate and carries a high level of confidence. As I indicated, the municipal wastewater charge actually has gone through a number of different iterations, between 1971 or 72 through 1998, the process was that a community's flow for the upcoming year and the total regional flow would be estimated. And so knowing what the revenue needs were for the upcoming year and using the assumed community and regional flow information, we would come up with the community's cost, again, based on a proportion, but we'd come up with the community's cost based on those estimates. They would pay their municipal wastewater charge based on those estimates, while at the same time, we would actually measure the flow for that period. So they're paying on an estimate, but yet we're measuring the flow. Then the following year, we would have the flow that they actually generated, calculate a new upcoming cost based on estimates, and then it would include an adjustment between the estimates that we made and the actual flows. Okay. So what that would result in huge swings. It was not uncommon for a community to see a cost increase from one year to the next increase by 30, 40%, and sometimes decrease by 20, 30%. Essentially what we were trying to do is we were trying to predict the weather 1 year in advance. And typically we wouldn't estimate a wet year, then the actual flow would be high, and then we would figure, well, what's the chances of having 2 wet years in a row? They'd have a wet year, so it just became very problematic. So in 1999, through a task force recommendation, we changed the allocation where it was based on an actual quarter-by-quarter volume. So for instance, third quarter of 1 year, that flow would be used for billing for the following year's first quarter. And then fourth quarter would be second quarter and so forth. What that resulted in was one, an unknown cost for a community from one quarter to the next, and an uncertainty of what the total cost would be. So as you can see, that cost allocation method only lasted 5 years, whereby in 2005 we came up with a third firm flow, which basically a community's bill would be based on a flow period between 18 to 6 months prior to the billing year. So for instance, under that process, we would have used, just got to think about this, we would use the flow from July 1st of 2023 through June 30th of 24 to bill for the 25 cost. And unfortunately, by the time that the flow data came in July, and the time that it would take to go through all of the adjustments and data verification, a community's costs were developed in that September, October, November time period, which gave communities no time to budget for their upcoming budget year. So then in 2016, we went to the current process where we basically just moved that flow period, if you will, back 6 months. So now we have the current 2-year lag. So for instance, the 2026 bills are based on flows that we realized in 2024. And we can notify those communities essentially what that upcoming cost will be in about May, preceding when those costs actually come in. So it gave communities much more time to plan for budgets purposes. This slide here just basically explains where the cost of service is proportional. Communities flow divided by regional flows. It comes up with a percentage, and that percentage gets applied to our overall regional wastewater charge budget, which is the $314.6 million. This slide here, basically, it just gives some examples. I think the main takeaway is that in some cases, a community can have a reduction in flow from 1 year to the next, but if that flow reduction isn't enough to offset the total regional flow reduction, or isn't enough to offset our annual increase in our MWC, so for instance, in 2026, the increase is 5.8%. If a community's flow isn't reduced enough to offset those two things, they can still have an increase in their wastewater bill, which which is hard for many communities to really understand. There's still a common perception that their cost is based on a rate per million gallons, which it is implied, but it's actually based on the proportioning of their flow to the regional flow. So sometimes that can be challenging, particularly for new finance people at the local communities to really understand how the process works. Oops. So then just in summary, the regional approach provides a uniform cost methodology for every community connected to the regional system. The community's cost is determined by proportionate share of the regional system, as I just explained. Challenging for some to shift the cost allocation paradigm from a rate to a proportionate regional. Community's proportionate share is in large part driven by their flow contribution into the system. And again, it can be difficult for some communities to understand where they have a situation where their flow is reduced, but their costs have gone up. Strength charges are addressed at the sources through our industrial waste permit. So it's strictly an allocation based on domestic strength and again, proportionality. And then also, a number of weeks ago, the intern that we had in our group provided an analysis of going to a rolling 3-year average to smooth out some of the peaks and lows that can be experienced even under the current allocation process. I think that I do think that that's something that is probably warrants further discussion through a task force. There are some disincentives for averaging flow over a number of years. The impacts of I&I tend to get dampened out a little bit. Which then, of course, then the incentive to chase I&I mitigation work is, becomes less important. Now, I've got some case studies here. I maybe pause and just, there's about 3 case studies here that exemplify situations where we discovered something and worked with the communities to identify these things. In the interest of time, I want to be respectful. There's one case study that I personally have always kind of prided our work in doing. So I would kind of like to share that with you if that's fine, or I can go through all of them.
Well, why don't we just pause quickly to see if there's any questions on what we've heard so far? Councilmember Carter?
Yeah, I had a question. You were citing in cases under certain conditions, community members, community homeowners could be billed individually. Could you give us an example of what would typically, what that range would be?
Madam Chair and Councilmember Carter, the question is how would we bill?
You said under certain conditions, a property owner could be billed individually. And I just wanted to get a kind of a ballpark of what that would look like.
Sure, Madam Chair and Councilmember Carter. That's related to intercommunity agreements that might exist between 2 communities. And if a community property in an adjacent community is served through a local system that then flows into a receiving community system, that some agreements will allow that community that's receiving the flow to actually bill for wastewater services to that property, even though it's located in an adjacent community. So it's an agreement that really exists between the 2 communities. But that property owner who's located in one community would basically be paying an invoice that's sent to another community. Robbinsdale and Golden Valley has a situation like that where Golden Valley, that's right, where Golden Valley actually bills 20-some properties in Robbinsdale for the service.
Okay, but individual property owners don't receive a bill, do they, under those conditions?
Yes, the individual property owner would receive.
And typically, what would that ballpark it? What amount would that be?
Well, usually, in most cases, the agreements will say that the community and the property in the adjacent community who's paying the other community for the service will pay the same rate as the other community. So for instance, if
Okay, so percentage-wise, it's going to come out.
it's going to come out, right.
Yeah,
Now, in
okay.
some cases, if that service to the adjacent community is more expensive, for instance, if the receiving community had to build a lift station and pump the flow and could justify that there's an added expense that most of the other residents in the community might not, or should not share in, then there may be a little bit of an increase
Okay.
in the rate. But typically, they try and level the cost, if you will, regardless of whether or not it's in the community, same community.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I have just one question. Just kind of on an average yearly basis, how many communities kind of call you back when they get their estimate for their charges? There's so much data and so much communication. It sounds like you're really doing a great job. I was just a curiosity factor. Out of your 111 communities, how many come back and go, well, we have to talk about this?
Yeah. Madam Chair, it really depends on whether or not we're going from a dry year to a wet year.
Okay.
The 2026 cost allocation, which includes 23 and 24 calendar years, were 2 extremely wet years. So this year, when we rolled out the cost, we did have I would characterize a fairly high number of calls that came in. I would say, probably less than a dozen, but probably close to that ballpark. And many times, again, we would see this increase before that final notice goes out. So a lot of them were given, we give a heads up on. Long Lake, for instance, is one that we've been reaching out to. We saw an increase like the year before last, I think. They got hit with an increase last year. This year, we're continuing, their flow is actually continuing to go up, and we've been meeting with them, working with them. We installed a temporary flow meter. That flow comes from another adjacent community because, of course, the higher flow is always coming from somebody else. So we went and we collected data, and it did show that maybe on a per house basis, that flow was a little bit more than what we were assuming. And I think in that case, we weren't actually making the adjustment. There was an agreement between the two communities, but at least now one of those communities, both communities are armed with the information that shows that, well, maybe the assumption of flow per household should be a little bit more.
That's good.
Well, I certainly appreciate the closeness that you work with the communities. You never like to just get a notice in the mail. And so the fact that, the front end work that you're doing and the close communications with the communities and the staff at the communities, I think builds a lot of trust. And it just seems like you're helping them to understand. It's fairly complicated. It's to try to figure it all out and getting kind of the heads up that something might be coming and we need to look at things and talk about stuff, I think is really appreciated. I know you've done that up in, my district as well with several communities, and so I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Councilmember Wolf?
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's why the task force model is so powerful, is because we don't do things to communities. We bring them in to talk over the pros and cons and decide collectively what's the best, fairest way to proceed. And I think I was part of the task force on that.
The last one.
Last one. But it's a very respectful relationship with the communities in terms of how we do things.
Appreciate that comment. Any other comments before we move on to your great examples here?
Okay. Well, let's see here. In Lilydale, we noticed the increase in flow. We contacted the community. They found that they had a water main break that was, the water was finding its way into the wastewater collection system. They repaired it. And then in here, I tried to include what the cost for some of these events actually resulted in. So in that case, it looks like between $10,000 and $15,000 of additional cost resulted from that. But the point being is, as soon as we saw that increase, we contacted the city so that they could go out and find it. This one here is an interesting one. Again, we saw an increase in the city of Orono's flow. It was related to a lift station, L49. The city was, the flow increase was about 31 gallons per minute. We contacted the city. The city went out, since it was in a lift station, it was a pretty small, isolated area, so they didn't really have to canvass a large area to find this. But what they found was that they came across a home whose the front door was open. It was in January or February, and water was running out the front door.
Oh, my God.
And it was a situation where the home had been foreclosed on. The people basically left the house, left the door open. Xcel Energy shut the power off because of non-payment of the bills, and then it froze. And the pipes in the basement broke, and it filled the basement up to the point where it was running out the front door.
My gosh.
So in that particular case, it was about 1.4 million gallons of flow, and the additional MWC cost to the city was about $3,200. But again, as soon as we saw that increase, we notified the city, and they went out and did some investigation and found it. And then my favorite one. This discovery came about really through just a chance conversation between actually myself and somebody in our interceptor group. And someone else kind of took the self-initiative to be creative, to track down where this flow was coming from. And it also kind of shows a collaborative approach with one of our customer communities. But it all started basically with a conversation I had with one of our service workers who was down in one of the pipes. And just in passing, he made some comment to how cold the wastewater was. And for anyone who's ever been knee-deep in wastewater, cold isn't one of the adjectives you use. Wow. And so that kind of got me wondering a little bit. Then I had a conversation with somebody, Ryan Vile, give credit to him, in our metering and alarm group, who then took it upon himself to kind of think about that. And he set up a temperature probe on a staff. And he went upstream and he took the temperatures all the way upstream. And you can kind of see on this map here where as he goes upstream, he's measuring flow between 40 and 30 degrees, and then he gets to the point where it jumps up to 50. Oh, going back a step, once we saw the flow, we contacted the city, and they came back and said, well, we can't find it. It's got to be coming from your system. So then we went through this process of taking the temperature, and we narrowed it down there. You can kind of see where at a junction there, upstream of the junction is 54 degrees, and then downstream of the junction it was 38 degrees, which is then part of the local collection system. So then we were able to tell the city, this is where we think the flow is coming from. And what they found was a structure that was located in a wetland area. And it was March, and we started to get some melt, and there was an ice sheet that moved and knocked the top cone section of the barrel off, and disjointed some of the sections of the structure. And the increase in the flow rate was 1.5 million gallons per day. And it took the city about 43 days to actually go out and repair the structure. They had to go out there, well, they had to hire a contractor, but they actually had to go out in boats to actually do this repair from like a pontoon boat or a john boat. And the total associated volume was about 66 million gallons over that 43 days. And that cost for that that was experienced by the city was about $142,000. So it was a costly source of inflow, but again, as soon as we discovered it, we were able to take the steps to actually narrow down, generally speaking, where the flow was coming from. And it really all came about just through a chance description of somebody's experience in a pipe. So it was
Wow.
Interesting story. And I'll close on that.
Any other comments or questions? Dr. Carter,
I
Councilmember Carter?
just want to say thank you, Kyle, because I remember we had an issue and you came out and I came out and we all met with the community and did a brilliant job, so thank you.
Yeah, I think we're still trying to get to the bottom of that.
Councilmember Lindstrom?
If something like that Shoreview example happened today, would there be anything in place where we could recognize that something is amiss, or would it still be a chance encounter, a chance conversation that would lead us to think something was strange?
Yeah, Madam Chair and Councilmember Lindstrom, the trigger was when we saw the flow jump instantaneously, as shown in this chart. And so we knew that there was a massive 1 MGD plus of inflow coming into the system. So we did reach out to the city. This particular part of the system, I believe, is Adam still here? I believe had recently gone through a condition improvement, rehabilitation. So we recently either sealed the joints or slip lined the pipe. So we were pretty confident that it wasn't coming into our system, and we have a meter upstream of this that didn't show it. So we knew, a section of the system where it was coming in. Honestly, if once we reached out to the city and they said they couldn't find it, if we had not heard the description of the flow, we would eventually have found it because the cost, this was a pretty significant cost to the city, and the city was going to would have continued to investigate it. But, we without that, we wouldn't really have caught it any time sooner. It was just a chance conversation that two engineers was having about how cold the wastewater was.
Councilmember Lindstrom?
I'm sure the city wasn't super thrilled to cut a check for $140,000+. But did they willingly say like, okay, yeah, we're on the hook for this, or were they grumpy about it?
Well, yeah, I'm sure they were crabby about it, but
Yeah.
they did realize it was their system. They realized that, even though it's clear water coming into the system, it is flow to the system, it still has to be conveyed and treated. They understood, the added cost to it. I think they were kind of thankful that at least we were able to kind of narrow down because there's multiple connections from Shoreview into the system. So our ability to at least narrow it down to a specific trunk sewer connection did narrow down their search pretty significantly.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Kyle, for coming. It just reiterates just all the work that's done, all the communication within the department, with all the communities, between all the divisions, and really appreciate all the work that the whole team does and the whole division does. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
So we're going to end with reports. So I'll start with myself. I've been pretty active in the Clean Water Council Policy Committee, and we're working on a draft policy for suggestions on large water users. And so that's been at the last couple policy meetings, and we have a meeting on this Thursday to talk about it. It's kind of attracting a lot of attention amongst lots of people. But what's really interesting is the Clean Water Council has done several different projects where we've been working on policy, and it takes quite a while for policy to get in through the legislature. And so as these things are up and coming, we're looking at them as well. The other thing we're talking about is at the Water Resources Conference last week, 2 weeks ago, there was a presentation by the University of Minnesota who did the looking at the lake effects of wake boats, and the effect on shoreline and the effect on the suspension of sediments. And so we're not quite there yet, but I think that will become a policy as well for the state to adopt, and as we work through that. And there's a lot of time for engagement when people can engage on these. We're not anywhere close to making a policy recommendation, but we're just working through the system on that. Council members, is there anything exciting going on? Councilmember Lindstrom?
The reason why I was particularly interested in the Shoreview example is because I presented to them last week, and they didn't bring it up. So that if they were angry, they buried the hatchet. But yeah, we did talk about I&I in the city and what they've been doing to address that, and they are recipients of the water efficiency grant. So I complimented them on that. And they've got a big, we have a big interceptor project happening in Grass Lake, $20-some million Grass Lake interceptor project that's going to be happening starting, like, I think any day now, through 2026. So we talked about that. I also attended an environmental quality board meeting. I'm the council representative to the EQB. A week ago or so, we talked about permitting, environmental review for data centers, and it was super interesting. They had the EQB presented, DNR presented, Commerce, State Commerce Department presented, and they all have a role in this area. What I thought was interesting was that there's no mandatory environmental review for data centers in the state unless they meet a certain threshold. And that threshold could be of a certain size or other factors. So I know that's of interest to this committee. And it seems like there's a lot of data centers coming down the pike, and we're just all kind of trying to figure out how to best do this before they're all sitting in our communities, you know? Like trying to figure out the rules. We're trying to build the plane as we're flying the plane. It kind of seems like that way. That's what I have to report.
Well, thank you. Anything else? Councilmember Wolf?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I attended the release of the state water plan. You had asked for somebody to represent us there, so I did in New Brighton, and we got a tour of their water treatment facility there, and it is absolutely fascinating. And the staff there are so knowledgeable, and they have great little exhibits to kind of, because, you know, it's like big pipes, so then they have like little science fair exhibit things that show you exactly how things are going within each section of the plant. And it was very educational. If you ever get a chance to tour it, do, because it's really cool what they're doing there.
Well, thank you for going to that. I appreciate it as well. General Manager reporting.
Well, it's November, the end of the week, right? So a little bit on the schedule. We got hit with a couple holidays for our schedule in November. So we won't be meeting again until our meeting in December. So December 9th, we'll be meeting again. And so we'll miss you, but enjoy the break and the holidays. The other thing is just a little bit of news. I've been around a long time. Every once in a while, something new comes across and you go, I haven't seen that one before. But yesterday at the Metro plant, we received a Vector truckload of a red dye, which is a prohibited waste. They tried to deliver a second one, but staff detected the red dye pretty quickly, and we were able to prevent the second truckload from being dropped off. So, we're working through. We found out through the data safety sheets that it's probably not going to hurt the aquatic, but we wanted to make sure we were going to meet our permit and, notified the duty officer. But one of our challenges is the second truck was leaking.
Oh, my gosh.
So we had red dye, dribbled all over the plant. And so there's cleanup because if it would rain, which it was projected that there might rain, we were worried about it getting into the stormwater and another source to the river. So staff really did a great job scrambling to respond to that. And if you happen to go 94 between 61 and hooking up to 35E, if you notice some red tint on the road, you'll know that it was the truck that we didn't let deliver to our facility. But yeah, red dye.
Can I ask what is so bad about red dye?
Well, number one, we don't treat. Our treatment process won't take it out. And that could theoretically make it through the plant and we'd have a red river, which would be alarming if nothing else. And in this case, it looks like it's not going to be harmful to aquatic and our own bugs, because if it disrupted our biological community in our plant, we wouldn't be able to treat effectively. So there's all kinds of well, this is not good to have into it, but dye is a prohibited waste for that reason.
Not necessarily that it's red dye, it's just that it's dye.
Dye, period,
Okay,
right?
gotcha.
So if we have an industry that uses dyes, that's not permitted.
Yeah, I think certain colored dyes might block photosynthesis
Yeah,
so.
Anything else?
that's it.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Especially the red dye.